Hello and welcome to Drive the Bid, which is brought to you by AutoHunter.com, which is an online auction with cars going live every single weekday. So if you're interested in buying or selling your collector car, be sure to check out AutoHunter.com. I am Jeff Sutton, and as always, I'm joined by Shiekhi on my left and Diego Rosenberg on the right. And today, we're of course going to be talking about the car news. Our topic of the day is cars we love but shouldn't. And then of course, we'll go over some of our favorite picks that are currently live on AutoHunter.com. So before we get too far into it, we do have a sponsor for today's video, and that is LandAirSea. So today's episode of Drive the Bid is brought to you by LandAirSea. Keep tabs of all your valuable assets from the palm of your hand. Remember, with LandAirSea, theft is temporary. Visit LandAirSea.com to claim your LandAirSea GPS unit for your classic vehicle. And as always, I think we always keep our Camaro here on the corner protected, so I'll go ahead and do that as well for this video.
That's why it's still here.
That is why it's still here. It hasn't been stolen because we can track it with our LandAirSea GPS. All right. So with that, how's it going, guys?
Howdy.
It's going all right. I guess this is a bad time to tell you that I now identify as a Diego, so we're going to have to redo the intro.
Oh, perfect. Yes.
So what are your pronouns?
Well,
You say him.
yeah, that's definitely one of them.
All right. Moving into the news, we have a Volkswagen.
So I've been keeping my eye on this because we need to replace our urban assault vehicle. Come on, it wasn't that fun. But anyway, it's not going to be out for another year, but they had the American debut on Monday. This is in Huntington Beach, California, which is a flashpoint of lots of protests if you Californians are familiar with that place. Nothing really new. 10 inches long, 10 inches longer than the short wheelbase version. We're only going to get the long wheelbase version. It's going to be 282 horsepower for the single motor. I think 300 horsepower for the dual motor one, which will also have all-wheel drive. We don't know the range yet. The battery should be at least an 86 kilowatt per hour. None of this means anything to me because I'm not in EVs, but I think it will be a little bit more interesting than your typical SUV. Now, I've never had a minivan in my life. I come from the station wagon world, but minivans are more interesting than SUVs. So I kind of am anticipating this, but I don't think we're going to be waiting for this car.
Yeah, you know, I'm not a huge fan of like the stereotypical Volkswagen EV styling on it, but I do like the general appeal of it. Like I like the white, and it's obviously got a bit of that retro flair. Because I wasn't a huge fan, and I don't think the ID4 performed particularly well from reviews that it got from some other things.
And styling for a lot of those cars are kind of boring, I think. Like Volkswagen, definitely just like milquetoast, maybe.
Yeah, hopefully this one's a little bit closer to the e-Golf side, because I've heard that one's great. In terms of overall appealing. And yeah, I'm not overly familiar with if there's any math that you can do with kilowatt hours to understand what that actually translates to. Most of the time people just kind of mention, I guess, horsepower and range for EV specs.
Right now,
0 to 60.
The range probably is going to be 280. It's not, they haven't announced it yet, so I shouldn't say anything, but 280 for someone who's not in EVs, who may have some kind of range anxiety, 280 doesn't cut it.
Well, I mean, you mentioned that this is the now U.S. available. This has already been for sale in Europe for some time now, right?
Yeah, but for some time, I think it's half a year maybe. Not
right, but
not
surely somebody in Europe has a accurate expectation for what mileage you might get.
Yeah, but it still remains to be seen what they're going to be doing for the American version.
Yeah, the ads are fun, though. I'll give them that. Volkswagen's ad department's been pretty good ever since the early 2000s. They have some of the best Super Bowl ads when I go back through my head.
Yeah, that was Crispin, Porter, and Bogusky, if I'm correct.
Oh, them.
Yeah, all right. Jeeps?
Yes. So Jeep has released the pricing breakdown for the 2024 Wrangler. So prices start at basically $34,000 So basically $34,000. The MSRP is $31,895, but that does not include the $17,995 destination charge. So when you do the math, that's $33,690. And they got a ton of different trim levels and power plants. So you got a 4-cylinder, You've got the plug-in hybrid electric setup, the 3.6 Pentastar V6, of course. And then at the top end, you got the 6.4 liter Hemi for the Rubicon 392. Now, there's 2 transmissions, but there's a big caveat to that. So you can get the 8-speed automatic comes standard in everything except for vehicles with the 3.6 Pentastar. You can get a 6-speed manual in Wranglers with the 3.6, but that's it. You can't get the 6-speed with any other engine. There's a lot of standard features new standard features for 2024. So standard across the board are first and second row side curtain airbags, which is always nice. Uconnect 5 with a 12.3-inch touchscreen. And then wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. That's across the range, but there's, starting with the Sport S models and above, you also get forward collision warning and advanced cruise control. And then on the outside, they've updated the styling. So there's a new grille. There's a windshield integrated, what they call trail-ready antenna. You can get 12-way power front seats, which was surprising. And then there's 10 colors and 10 new wheel designs.
So I like the front grille, but I will say the more adjustable seats doesn't surprise me so much, because I would like to see a poll done to see if the majority of Jeep owners actually take their vehicles off-road or just want a cool-looking experience on the streets.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's always going to be the owners that just, use them as mall crawlers. But I would think relative to other, especially luxury brands, I would think that the percentage of people that off-road their Wranglers is higher than it is for, let's say, G-Wagon or Range Rover owners.
Okay, yes, that I'll agree with, given that there's a fairly hefty price point difference.
Yeah, that's true.
Probably a psychographic difference too.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I can imagine that being the case. Yeah, so, you spend over $100,000 on a G-Wagon, it would be that much more painful to get the first scratch on it.
Yeah, even as far as the manual thing, for me personally, I'm not sure I'd want a manual for off-road. I'm sure there's some people that would yell at me and tell me that I should have a manual if I'm going to go off-roading. But I mean, I think an automatic is probably what I would prefer. So it's just one less thing for me to worry about as I'm trying to get low-end torque, right? I'd rather put it in one of the low gears or using, for low rather than worrying about having it in first or wherever.
Yeah. I feel the same way as you, but yeah, I know there are a lot of people out there. That's the way they like to do it. They like to shift their own gears on and off the road. But yeah, and then there's some other updates. So that Off-Road Plus feature, so that optimizes things like the throttle and the transmission shift points and traction control. That is migrating to other models. So it's spreading from the Rubicon gas models to the Willys 4xe and the Willys gas models as well. And then I mentioned this in one of our earlier episodes. They're releasing a newer, lower priced entry level 4xe model, their plug-in hybrid. That's the Sport S 4xe. So that's, basically $50,000 as opposed to the next rung up, the Willys, which starts at around 55. And so with that, you get 20-inch wheels, adaptive cruise control, full-time transfer case. And there's also some updates to the Rubicon. So you can get a factory installed 8,000-pound winch. And then I also mentioned this a few episodes ago. You get the Dana 44 full float solid rear axle. So those are generally more robust than a semi-floating design, and they can handle more weight. So max towing capacity on the Rubicon is 5,000 pounds.
Okay.
Anyway, those are the highlights. There's a lot to these updates, but those are the highlights right there.
For all the Jeeple interested in learning more about it.
Jeeple, I like that.
It's a Jeep thing. You wouldn't understand. I'm surprised that Jeep hasn't actually made a knock to the rubber ducky thing yet.
Oh, like what? Like a Jeep branded
Well,
thing?
so you know how Jeep has started adding like more and more like little like nods to like, oh, look, here's the original, Willys like 40s Jeep from World War II. Here's just some other like, throwbacks, if you will, to like Jeep heritage and trails and things like that. And I'm surprised there hasn't been like a rubber ducky joke,
I would love to see
like a rubber ducky edition that just comes in yellow.
Yeah.
What is the connection to rubber ducky and Jeep?
Okay. So Jeeple being Jeeple.
Wake up, Jeeple.
Yeah.
No relation to sheeple?
No, different. Jeeple like to play a game where if you see another Jeep, you're supposed to leave a rubber duck. And that's like basically a sign of like, oh, hey, I as a Jeep person acknowledged your Jeep in the
Where
parking
do you
lot.
leave? Like,
You just leave it like on their Jeep, like on the fender or on the hood or something like that. Some people put it on dashes if it's doorless.
doesn't that get expensive?
I don't know. You can probably buy rubber ducks in bulk, right? So it can't be that bad. But if you're a Jeeple, maybe that's where you put your money. You get the manual transmission, save some, about $1,000 off the automatic, and then just put that in the rubber ducks.
So it's like the Corvette Wave, just something different.
Yeah, I don't know if the Corvette Wave would apply just to Corvettes though, because I mean, I
There's
feel
the
like
Jeep Wave.
yeah, they just throw rubber ducks at each other.
No. I mean, like on the road, like it's something like, I don't know, you lift your 2 fingers off the steering wheel or whatever. But
there's
I
a
think
proper
Wranglers
way.
do it. Wrangler owners do it. Yeah.
Oh, yikes. I mean, yeah, certain manufacturers are better than others. Like certain cars, people do not care at all that you're driving a similar car. I've had some cool encounters in Porsches. Mustangs is also one of the better ones. I feel like there's a lot of people that don't really wave for Mustangs. Just kind of depends. All right. Here's mine. So in case you're not familiar, and depending on when you're watching this episode, Le Mans is this weekend, which is the 100th running. So it's kind of a big deal. But on top of that, it's also, just to touch on it briefly, so it's the centennial for Le Mans. And then on top of that, it's also the 75th anniversary for Porsche. And it's something else for Cadillac that I'm spacing off the top of my head. So Cadillac really wants to win. And of course, Porsche really wants to win. So they're kind of the big 2 teams to watch, going for the overall victory. And of course, Ferrari is competing, but I don't think they have any particular like special reason to compete. They're just in the class, which is hypercar now as opposed to the LMP prototype class that it used to be, I think. But this was there. This is one of the cars that has been unveiled as they're doing all of the, preliminary testing and qualifying. And this is the 2023 Toyota Prius 24 Hours of Le Mans edition. So it's a Centennial GR edition. It's a one-off concept car, so there's currently no intentions to build it, but it's inspired by Toyota's Le Mans winning GR010 hybrid race car, which I believe will last one in 2021, but is also racing this year. And then it used to dominate apparently, and then it's been just, I guess, competitive. But all the modifications are intended to be functional. With the added wide body, also comes with wider wheels and tires, and it still retains the sort of standard hybrid 2.0 inline 4, which makes about 196 horsepower and 139 pound-feet of torque, which means it's 0 to 60 in about 7.2 seconds. Although part of me wonders if maybe it's slightly slower with the added aero in resistance.
Yeah, maybe.
Because I don't think it makes enough horsepower to break those tires loose to justify them, because it's got wider tires on the rear as well. So it may be slower now in 0 to 60, but maybe it's better on the track with 196 horsepower. I think it's kind of cool. Obviously, the LED lights on the lower panel are obviously like a basically stolen from the race car type of look. And I think it looks great. And knowing the Toyota buyer base for the Apex and the Camry TRD, I think people would buy these if they decided to produce them. I mean, even if they did it in like a limited production number, or some people on the internet were kind of like fascinated, like what if they took that i3, the turbo i3 from the Corolla GR and shoved it in here?
Huh.
Yeah, that would be wild. I do like the little body, the little added bodywork here that's kind of on the side with the added flares. I think that looks very functional. Again, not sure how functional it needs to be for a Prius with 196 horsepower, but if you're going to do it to a Prius, this is the Prius to do it to. And I found out a week ago there's actually a Prius racing series. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but they make like these crazy wide body Priuses that are like full on race cars that they run them through. And I think at one point they even had V8s. So yeah, they were like full-on race cars with totally altered bodies. Basically, like you were looking at the taillights and the headlights of a Prius, and you're going, I guess that's kind of a Prius. And there was a dedicated race series in Japan for them, which I thought was pretty cool.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so the more you know. It'd be cool if this exists, but we'll see.
Yeah, that's one of those cars. Like two-tone can be real tricky. Like some cars can just look weird with it, but I think it really works for this.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that I'm sure someone out there is going to want to shoot me, but the new Prius looks good, especially for a Prius, especially for a Toyota.
Yes.
I think they uglied it up. I think just leave it alone.
I disagree.
I think the new one's just very nice and smooth.
From an air standpoint, they uglied it up, but now it's a functional. These are all functional upgrades. I think that's the part that to me is more appealing about this.
The car that's barely any faster than the stock one.
I don't think it is any faster. I think it's, if anything, it's slower in a straight line. I think.
Maybe. So, yeah, I mean, how much? What do those functions do for it?
Aero.
At the kind of speed that it's
if it's going downhill, it'll be going even faster with the wind behind it.
Oh boy!
I mean, 196 horsepower is not bad, especially for a Econobox. I don't know how much a Prius weighs, but they're actually fairly lightweight, being that helps them with fuel economy by saving weight. So like most of the time, the seats don't feel quite as plush as maybe some more luxurious vehicles, but they do that to save weight, so you get better gas mileage. So it's probably not that bad. Especially because it was a huge increase from what it was. I can't imagine this car weighs any more than any of the previous Priuses.
Prior Prius.
Prior Prius.
Priuses or Prii?
Well, if you're from England, it's Prius.
Prius.
But that's a cool thing. I wanted to share something Le Mans based. Obviously, we'll probably have more next week after the race is over to talk about whether we're celebrating somebody totally unrelated, because Cadillac and Porsche are not the only ones competing. I mentioned Ferrari, but Glickenhaus is in there. There's one of the other, companies you don't hear about because all they do is build race car chassis. Is also competing in the hypercar class. Maybe like one other manufacturer that's kind of in the same boat. So it's like a fairly loaded. I think there's 5 or 6 teams in just that top hypercar class, and we'll have to see how everything else goes, because there's also the Corvettes are racing, and I believe they're slightly modified now. They're featuring a different engine, I believe, in the C8R. So that'll be racing in its normal like GT class. So I'll be watching those as well as a Corvette fanboy. So with that, it is time to move on to our main segment, which is cars we love but shouldn't for whatever reason, whether that be mechanical, I guess, electrical, problematic, just the way they look, whatever the case. Let's get into it.
All right. I'm sure this comes as no surprise.
There's going to be lots of mockery in this episode. Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I've always liked the looks of these. I actually drove one, probably over 10 years ago. And just always loved the looks of them. But, these seem to have a reputation as like an old fogey mobile,
yes.
Square, dated, boring, whatever. But I've just always enjoyed the looks. Obviously, it is part of that, retro futuristic wave of the 2000s, which I have bought into with the Bullet. And this is definitely got retro styling cues. You got the portholes and the hardtop, but I just love the sleekness of it. I love that you can get the two-tone interior, and it just seems like it would be a cool laid back cruiser.
Looking at the needles there in the interior, do you know if these have like that Ford green, signature green interior?
Like the backlighting?
Yeah.
That I don't know. It would seem a little weird, but then again, it is a Ford product, so maybe it does.
From the right era, too.
Yeah. Now, one cool thing about these is they have the bones of the Jaguar S-Type and the Lincoln LS of the time.
Which is also the Ford Mondeo, I believe. The Ford Mondeo's platform as well, I think.
No, that was the X-Type. I think that was the bones of the X-Type. And what makes this unusual is the displacement of the V8. It's a 3.9 liter V8, which I cannot remember any other car with that particular.
What did the LS have?
I think it was a 3.92. Yeah, I don't think it was any larger. I want to say that was a 3.9 as well.
And so that's not the same as the Jaguar 4-liter V8, right?
It's the same engine. So maybe it's semantics issue. Like maybe they identified it as a 3.9 and it was really a 4-liter.
Which
Or Jaguar was optimistic in calling it a 4-liter.
Right.
Yeah, the Jags of the time, they were 4-liter V8s.
Right, until the mid 2000s, they updated them to a 4.2.
Yes. Yeah. But and in fact, when I was researching these, the majority of people that were requesting insurance quotes on these were baby boomers, like 60% of them. So millennials and the younger crowd not as interested in these.
No kidding.
Yeah. Yeah. So I will say this is a perfect pick for this episode because these are I've been in the same boat where I've kind of like looked at these and I go, oh, that's kind of fun, but I should never own one of those.
I'll be honest with you. I've actually thought about it when I was coming up with a list of cars to get. Obviously the Bullet was on there, but this was kind of on the fringe. I was like, oh, I like them. The prices aren't terrible. You can find low mileage examples, and there was one. I think it was the Pacific Coast Highway Edition. It was like this kind of light frosty green, and then I think on the inside it had like green accents as well. But
let's be honest, you would want the James Bond one, the salmon orange Holly Berry car.
Oddly enough, not that one.
If I drove this, I would have to develop the habit of smoking a pipe because I could not be in the driver's seat without smoking.
Would it be pipes or cigars that you'd be smoking? Because you'd probably be on your way to the yacht club to match your portholes with your car.
And not vaping either, just a pipe.
Vaping is for Subarus.
Well, Subaru.
Yeah, but I don't vape.
I know. I'm just saying.
You're not living up to the brand. How are you supposed to fit in Subaru's image?
This would I would want a pipe, and I don't mean with bubbles. I mean with tobacco.
All right, Derek's first car down.
Okay. So these are somewhat unfortunate cars. This is a 1961 Dodge Dart. I do prefer the Polara, but this is a better picture. The Polara was just no longer wheelbase and different taillights, and I think the grille may be a little different, but looks the same. I don't know. These are kind of interesting to me because they're so unfortunate looking compared.
What?
Compare it with a Pontiac or a Chevrolet from the same year. Actually, all of GM from 1961, and compare it with this. GM was hot, and this is just kind of like Virgil Exner.
So all the Pontiacs were very hot. I'm not a huge fan of some of the Chevrolet products from the time. I think I'd prefer the Pontiacs, but this looks good in my opinion.
Well, to me, it has appeal. It's just ugly. I mean, just because I like something doesn't mean it has to be great in any way. It's like, I'm not going to say that the Ramones are great. They play great music, but they do have their place. Let's to use a metaphor. In this case, I think there's something intriguing about it. I do like the greenhouse, the shape. It kind of looks like it's in some ways a Bullet at speed. Do you have the Plymouth? Why didn't you flip on that? Now, the 61 Plymouth is equally as unfortunate, but let's say...
This one is very unfortunate.
Automotive butterface.
Of the two, this one has a lot more collector appeal these days.
What?
There's, I think, maybe more of a kitsch factor with it. It's really hard to figure out which one's uglier, but this is the one that's more popular.
No, this is the uglier car. Let me clarify that right now. This is the uglier car of the two, for sure.
This is the one that's more popular in the collector car world. That's why I chose that.
That's okay. They can be wrong.
So, I mean, equipment-wise, they're pretty much the same. This one probably has a shorter wheelbase.
That front end is bad. Like, it looks like they were like, hey, check out this rear end they designed. They're like, why not just put that on the front? They're like, oh, all right.
To me, the front end of this one looks like it came from Japan. Something like that.
See, I like the headlights. This right here is a little busy. I prefer this front end to over the previous
The
one.
other one looks a little sleepy.
Yeah, it's pinched and just oddly
I guess
concave.
my main design feature that I like here, there is some weird stuff like this bump right here. Almost looks like they had a truck front end. And they were like, no, this needs to look like a car. And they just molded in these extra body lines. But this is what I particularly like.
Yeah, that's cool. Like
That
from
slanted
back.
fin. Yes.
Yeah.
And of course, the lack of a B pillar is fantastic.
Well, I mean, they did have ones with B pillars. The roof line is a lot less.
No, we're not interested in the one.
Yeah. I mean, I chose this for a reason.
Yeah, I don't see what could be.
I mean, even Ford was great in '61. Well, I mean, let's say Ford was pretty good. They weren't like Chevrolet or Pontiac. Mercury was odd in '61. Lincoln was awesome, as we know. But Chrysler was in a bad spot in '61. Most, if not all, their cars are kind of ugly.
That just it has that one weakness. But the rest of it, I think, looks fine. I mean, I don't know what the back end looks like.
I mean, it's like, I'm a Pontiac guy. So let's say with the '61 Pontiac, do I like it more? Yes, but I may be more interested in owning this.
I really like the fender well designs. I think that's got a cool swoop to it over the front, and then the rear is pretty cool.
It's graceful.
We just need to take another try at the front end, I think, is what needs to happen here. They just kind of send it back to the artist to be like, we love the direction you're going in. Let's just try it again.
just take a different one. Okay?
Yeah, let's just take a different creative direction.
We don't have a picture here, but the rear end of the '61 Dart is kind of unusual because it's almost nondescript and the taillights are very small to the point where they actually introduced you can see there, it's like a little lip wrapping around.
Right.
It just extends pretty much the same length to the rear end, and it's not very visible. So they introduced an accessory taillight that's just like tacked on, and it just looks horrible.
Oh, man.
But the Polara had these, it looks like an ingrown toenail along the sides. So you can see it from the rear, but it's like poking out from the sides.
Hey.
A little bit similar to this, but different. You can see the taillights here on the side, but those aren't taillights. Those are like, I don't know, howitzers. And the taillights are, at the tip of those.
Oh, yes. The 50s and 60s had such great, design and names for things.
This is a great example of designing a car in the 50s, and someone forgot to tell Virgil Exner that it's now the 1960s.
Okay. I mean, it doesn't have as much chrome as the big chrome cars of the 50s, but
No, but it seems like they're still trying to do certain things that were popular in the 50s, but kind of trimmed it in a way that was very 1960s. It's like a 1960s design with 1950s styling.
But does that matter as much as we get into this day and age? To me, as someone who's a little bit younger and, maybe a little bit outside of what these cars were at the time, when I look at something like this, it's got massive fins on it, which is not necessarily what we always associate with.
I wouldn't call them massive. I would say they're reverse fins, which is probably the only brand that had anything like that. But I mean, you say massive because they extend along the rear fender.
Yeah, they're fairly notable. They're clearly there to be fins, as opposed to you look at 55 Bel Air, which has the separation but doesn't necessarily flare out the same way as a 57. But to me, I wouldn't even think about the fact that this design might look a little dated by the time we're getting into the early 60s, right? With the fact that it has a fin still. But to me, it's just a fun looking car, which I would prefer to this one, aesthetically speaking. Kind of an interesting argument, I guess. All right. This is my first car. This is a Volvo 850 Estate. Now, there's a couple different performance versions. The reason I put this on here is because I think generally, it's more of a European thing, especially to like performance wagons. We here in the US, which is why we lost our right to purchase them when it was removed by BMW and Audi to Europe-only models until brought back recently with the RS6. We're not allowed to purchase estates, especially performance estates here in the US, but this one is particularly interesting. Obviously, it was sold as a turbo model that had a 20-valve 5-cylinder, or you could buy a T5R. Of course, cars could be available with a manual transmission as well. So manual transmission, turbocharged 5-cylinder Volvo. This thing's amazing. On top of that, They were also used as race cars. And in this particular one that you can see, the actually has two wheels off of the ground.
This is a motorcycle race, right?
Yes, right. So this is the Lammers Volvo 850 Estate, which is a fairly famous car. Obviously, for this racing circuit, this was the, I believe, Super Touring series. And so most of these cars that were in here were kind of more sedans. So having a wagon in there as a race car is not something you see very often. There were the standard like Volvo 850 sedan race cars as well. But this was especially interesting because it's the estate. And one of the things they would do, it's kind of hard to find photos of this and find the exact stories, but here is Lammers with a stuffed dog. And supposedly during the races and even during some like performance laps and like testing and stuff like that, they would throw the stuffed dog in the back as a joke to some of the other drivers, because the 850 Estate dominated some of the racing series, that they would put stuffed animals in the back. So they'd be laughing and the stuffed animals would be flopping around in the back of the car while they were driving around, while other drivers wouldn't have that type of space, right? And would see a station wagon currently beating them in the race. So I thought it's kind of a funny car. Not your, like, you know, some people might think they're fairly ugly cars. They're not the most attractive thing on the planet. They're just a brick.
When I was a kid, this was a hot car. I wanted it. And if I recall correctly, the yellow one was a limited edition version of it.
Yeah, so this yellow one's a T5R. So this is the
maybe they had two
more
colors,
limited
like black
production.
and yellow. I don't really remember, but I remember the yellow one. There was something special, maybe.
Yeah, this is the rarer one, which is why it has the newer wheels that look a little out of place. The wheels look newer than the actual design language of the car. Yeah, these are the hopped up ones, which these had a bit more power.
What's cool about the race car is that if you get in an accident, you're likely to survive.
Yeah. I think it's just wild. Picturing an estate race car, right? It's one of those things that you're like, they would never do that as a race car because that's not practical. And here it is, winning races with stuffed animals. And then even when they rounded up Goodwood recently, they still put a stuffed dog in the side of it, rounded up Goodwood. So fairly cool car. And obviously what a cool racing history to think that somebody had a race car that was winning so much they could just started throwing stuffed animals in the back of it as a joke to some of the other drivers is hilarious to me.
And I like the fact that they left the roof rails on it too.
Yes. Yeah.
Just keep that full wagon look.
Yeah, you can't have the Volvo 850 is not a race car. What station wagon's a race car? This one. So kind of funny.
All right.
We've been seeing this too much.
I've been seeing quite a bit of these lately.
Yeah, so this one is next on my list. I've always liked the looks of this car. And this is one of those cars like, people of my parents' generation, they might look back and say like, oh, I've always loved like the, 67 Firebird or 65 Mustang, whatever, stuff like that. This is kind of along the same lines for me because my very first semester in college, this is dating myself, I was walking on campus at UT Austin, and I assume one of the professors had one of these. It was silver. It had those wheels, but they weren't chromed. Black interior, walnut trim. And I just walked by that car every day and I thought, man, this is like the perfect look for this. And these get, I think, knocked a lot because even though it was the first convertible for Lexus, even though it had lines inspired by yachts, I think people bag on these because it just looks like basically like a bar of soap,
I thought it was inspired by the Audi TT in some ways. That's kind of, I never heard the yacht thing.
Oh yeah. These are interesting. I remember just seeing one in a Taco Bell parking lot of all places one day, and I just remember seeing it and because the back kind of looks like the front. So in like a sort of like layman's way, it's a bar of soap, and then it's even maybe just similar all around. I don't even remember the car coming out. Don't remember really hearing anything about it. Obviously, the fact that it's a hardtop convertible is a pretty cool detail.
Yes.
As far as these types of cars go, but there's your wood interior. This looks like a Jaguar. Like if Lexus decided they were going to build a Jaguar.
I don't think it's a coincidence that you like this and the Thunderbird.
No, we're seeing definitely a similar theme.
Well, what can I say? I'm almost 40. I guess it's catching up with me.
I would rather have this than the Thunderbird. I mean, it's a nice looking car. It's like I don't want it, but it's always been a nice looking car.
I'd have to take the Thunderbird, I think.
Oh,
I like the retro styling.
Just came into my mouth.
Like this to me is just it's too trafficy. I appreciate the hardtop convertible.
What do you mean?
It just blends in with traffic. Like the front could be mistaken for an Altima. And I think the Ford Thunderbird is like it stands out.
I don't think you have to pick this car apart. I think you have to look at the whole, and it's a good looking. It's like a retirement car. It's like a car that you're just going to go and Sunday drivers.
Yeah, and I think that's part. That's
how
part
is
of
that
the
any
reason why I
different from
picked
the
this.
Thunderbird?
Well, it looks better.
And
it's got
agree to disagree on that one.
Probably the engine's a lot sweeter too, I imagine.
These are what, V6s?
No, 4.3 liter V8.
It's
really
like the LS. And
this is,
I imagine.
Yeah.
Huh. Whoop.
Oh.
Don't look at that.
Anyway, that what you said, Diego, was one of the reasons I picked this and why it fit on this list, because it does have, like the Thunderbird, it has that kind of old fogey kind of sort of. I think people perceive it as an old fogey retirement car, but I've just always liked it.
When did these come out?
2002, and they ran until 2010, I believe. Yeah,
really?
02 to 10. Yeah,
I didn't realize they were being produced that long. Because you don't see them you see them often, but like not that often. Like they're not showing up to car shows. They're not.
No, I think the typical driver today is a widow who has a fancy car, and this is it.
Why can't their partner be alive?
No, it's because my dad has dated them.
Speaking of a personal connection.
Yeah, fair enough. That sounds very specific. All right.
Okay. Okay. My parents are from Argentina originally, so I used to see a bunch of Citroens. They had the 2CV, the 2 Chevaux, in Argentina. Actually, there's a version called the 3CV, and I don't really know why, but that's I kind of liked them for some reason as a kid. And they also had this model called the Ami 8. And I'll get to the Ami 8 in a second. This is an Ami 6. This is the one that most Americans are familiar with because it has often made top ugly car lists. And I'm not really into that reverse slant C-pillar. I mean, Mercury had something like that too. And I don't think it was attractive either. But I always kind of had a thing for it. I know the other picture that we're going to see is the Ami 8, which is the update. This one was available as a sedan, which is ugly, and also a wagon, which comes off a little bit better. Actually, it comes off much better because otherwise it doesn't have any controversial styling feature. Underneath this is a 2 Chevaux. It's just with a modern body. But one of the things I liked about this, you can go to the Ami 8. Oh, I'm not even... my fault for not showing the picture, but it's one of the first cars, I'd say either the first or the second, to have the European style headlamps, which I always thought was cool because in the United States, we just had these round headlamps or these halogens.
Due to our dumb regulations.
Exactly. So this is the updated, let's say, sedan, which I think looks much better. And then there's also wagon. So you can just imagine it looking conventionally like a wagon. The front end of the Ami 8 is much better than the Ami 6.
Are the rear wheels narrower than the front?
That I don't know, but it looks like in the picture, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, like the track is narrower.
But, I mean, it's based on a 2 Chevaux, and I never had that impression from that car, but I could be wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, so I'm not a huge French car fan. I have a lot of French cars that I love, but it's funny that you mentioned the Citroën Omni because in the news lately has been the new Citroën. What's the proper way to say it? Citroën? Is that?
I mean, French-wise, I don't know.
Yeah, as an American speaker, yeah. Citroën Ami was in a roundabout, and somebody was just, putting their foot down on it and just testing what it could do, I guess. And then it flipped sideways. It went skidding around the roundabout. Super tiny cars. I think they're only 2 doors now. They're little tiny cars. And then they also unveiled I believe it's a Fiat counterpart to it. That is a throwback to like the little Fiat yacht cars, that were kind of open.
Oh, the Jolly.
Yeah. So they made a modern Fiat version that's based on the new Citroën Ami platform as well. What I wanted to mention was this one, the Ami 6. This made me instantly think of the Ford Anglia. with that rear.
Yeah. I don't like those either. I know they're popular.
Well, Harry Potter made them popular.
Yeah, but I mean, like in the UK, they've always been popular.
Well, family cars.
Yeah. It's just that this one is kind of like representative of everything that's wrong with French cars.
Except for the Alpine A110.
I'm sorry?
Except for the Alpine A110. That car is perfect.
Sure, fair enough. Like I was saying about the Ramones, not that I'm a big Ramones fan or anything like that, but I can respect them for what they are. They don't play good music, but there could be something derived from it. In the same way with this, or at least let's say the Ami 8. I just found them interesting, especially with the headlights. The other car with the European style headlights that came out at the same time was the German Ford Taunus, which actually I probably could include in this list, but Americans aren't very familiar with it, so it's not really fitting the same vein.
That's definitely a good way to change it up. All right.
I'm seeing a theme. This is one of yours. I mean, all these cars I've seen before in the podcast. You must really like them.
Oh, that's not mine.
No, this is mine.
Oh.
So this is not, it's not this specific car. This is a Saab 900 Turbo. I want a two-door Saab manual of some sort. And it's not, obviously a 900 would be the classic look to go for, especially the turbos, which have significantly jumped in value as of late.
What about the earlier ones, like a 99?
I'd probably prefer a 900. I think they're just updated them a little bit better. But this would probably be my true love. I just like,
Viggen.
Yeah, I like being able to tell people that I drive a Viggen, because then you're now associating Saab with its aerospace roots. And obviously that's the jet, the fighter plane in the background.
You say I drive a Viggen, it sounds like you're cursing.
Or talking about vegetables.
Sure.
I don't think that's what he was going for, but let's go with that.
I think they're really unique. The main things that come to mind are how there's a few things that you can confuse people with. The fact that you have your key, your ignition is actually in the center of the car. And then for the manual transmission cars, they actually have a reverse lockout. So in order to even get your key out of the ignition, the car has to be in reverse.
Don't quote me, but I think that's pretty common with a lot of American cars earlier, like in the late 60s, early 70s. Maybe.
Not that I know of. I've never had
part of the safe. They have the anti-theft device with the steering column starting in '69. I think that was a part of it.
I'm sure there are some cars that do that. I can tell you that my dad's Vet doesn't do that, from '73. But
well, the beauty is these days a manual transmission by itself is a theft deterrent device.
This is true. There's
not for you, but
videos on the internet, right? I think there was one I saw at a gas station where some guy showed up, went to go jack a car, and then couldn't move it because it was a manual, and then got back out of it and ran away. What a great way to deter somebody from stealing your car. But yeah, I just, it's, I guess it wasn't intentional. I didn't think I would end up with two Swedish cars on my list, which were now bought, obviously. I would even own some of the early GM subs. I guess I should also mention I wouldn't want any of the Saabs that are other cars disguised as Saabs.
So, badge stuff. Yeah,
while I would drive them because it's like, oh, secretly this is a Subaru, right? Or secretly this is a Trailblazer or whatever it's based on. I would actually prefer the unique models because I think those have obviously more quirks to them, even though it's fun to have the different versions. So, yeah, they're just fun vehicles. And from what I understand, things like the Turbo are like genuinely pretty quick and fairly fun to drive. And the people that seem to have Saabs really, really love them.
Very devoted.
Right. So it's one of those cars that they're not the most attractive cars, but in a way they're also kind of very attractive.
I don't think there's anything about them that I would say it's unattractive. I just think that maybe they're not conventional compared with what we're used to. But okay. I never felt them ugly.
They're a little goofy, but also very distinctive because of that.
For me, I love the 9000. That was a hot car when I was a kid. A 9000 with a stick, and it was huge inside. Very nice car.
I think Brad
his was unfortunately destroyed by a road raging incident. Yeah. It's the unfortunate part with Saabs is they're so cheap that any sort of rough and tough to the car can total it out. And obviously some parts are harder to find for some cars than others. He had a really nice example of a 9000 that he was restoring and had put some effort into already. And unfortunately, a guy in a truck who apparently had some other incidents of road rage as well under his record when after everything was said and done. Unfortunately, hit him in a way that caused the car to spin and get scuffed on a few different sides.
But he got arrested.
It's I don't know exactly what happened, but there was definitely the other guy was in the wrong, and I probably assume he's not on the road anymore.
Hopefully not. Yeah, it was so bad it crunched. I think it crunched part of the roof, so they just totaled it.
Yeah. But very cool cars, very quirky cars nonetheless. And then here's that picture I mentioned earlier where you can see the manual transmission and the central ignition.
Wondering what that stuff is down there.
Some kind of vent.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
That's for the beeps and the sweeps.
That's thrust.
That's how you launch the missiles. Put out your landing gear when you need to stop.
Yeah, flaps down. All right. Okay.
It's actually a pretty good driving car.
You're getting made fun of for this. But go ahead.
Of course.
Yeah. This is kind of like a modern Mustang at the time.
This was supposed to be the replacement for the Mustang.
Well, the earlier one, not this one.
This was supposed to. Yeah, that's true. The earlier Probe was intended to replace the Mustang, but then the SN95 came out.
Yeah. So I picked this one. Again, this is a nostalgic pick for me because when I was in high school, I went. Good buddy of mine, he had a second generation Probe GT, a red one, manual, and we went a lot of places in that, hung out a lot. So that was part of my high school experience. But there was one time when a group of friends and we were going down to the river to go tubing. So my buddy Evan brought his. Our friend Jason had a first generation one, and then our friend Cody had a second generation, might not have been a GT, but it was a red one. Anyway, so we took 3 probes down to the river, and then Jason was being a lunatic because he was on a donut spare and he was doing like 80 or 90 miles an hour down there. Fortunately, everybody survived. But yeah, like you guys were saying, when these came out, not this generation, but the boxier one came out as an 89 model, that was in a time where in which Ford was trying to leverage its interest in Mazda. So they used, the Mazda underpinnings, which were also used in the MX-6, the corporate cousin to this. So it was front wheel drive. You had a 4-cylinder, an available V6. And
for this one, I think for the older one was a Turbo 4, wasn't it?
Yeah, you're right. So yeah, there was a Turbo 4
they
for the first one.
Replacing the Mustang with a front wheel drive Turbo 4 car.
Yeah, and from my research, part of it was, Ford wanted to kind of get away from the inefficiencies of a V8, and then you had these so anyway, that was part of it. And I think the fact that there was actually a campaign in 87 when people became aware of what Ford was thinking of doing. There was a letter writing campaign where fans of the Mustang urged Ford to not go through with it. So of course, they didn't end up doing that. They kept the Mustang, but they ended up making this. First generation came out in 89. Second one came out in 93. And like you were saying earlier, Diego, apparently the second generation model was a good driver. There was a road test I was reading last night, and, even though it was down on torque compared to the Turbo 4, the V6 second generation model, smooth power, ride was a little stiff, but the performance was, satisfactory for what it was. Obviously not a Mustang, but it had, pleasing driving dynamics for the time.
I thought I drove one at length, and by at length, maybe 100 miles. I can't tell you. A friend had one, and it was like a V6 muscle car, and he had a stick. It was great. I mean, it sounded great. At least from the front, it looks great. I kind of had a thing for the greenhouse for the Mazda version of it. But get the Mazda and put this front end on it, and I thought it would have been perfect. It was a cool car. It kind of surprises me that there hasn't been any collector interest in them in some ways, because it just seems that they like to try to find anything and everything. But no, I'm okay with this. The standard version is totally not interesting at all. I mean, it's a coupe commuter car.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's definitely not a Mustang. It's not a hot rod, but it's attractive. You can get a V6 in it. You can get a manual transmission. I really dig these. I mean, if I had just, fun money to blow, I'd love to get one of these. A GT, of course, with a stick.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, there was a time when they were thinking about making a third generation version of this. Ultimately, we all know they didn't end up doing that,
Thank
but
goodness.
they put the funding toward the Mercury Cougar, final generation Cougar. Yeah.
That would have been a better selection, I think, for this presentation.
But see, I'm not into those. And I was reading the spiritual successor to these, I think was the Escort ZX2, which was, like you say, Diego, an unfortunate looking car. But yeah, apparently that's the spiritual successor to these.
Yeah, sorry, I can't get on board with this pick. I have an S95, and I would take that heads down without a thought.
Yeah, but it's not up for debate which one you would take. In the end, this is just kind of an attractive coupe.
Right, and Derek is more than welcome to have this car on his list. I'm just telling him that he's wrong.
Jeff, save that for the internet commenters, okay? They're going to say that.
So when you guys took your trip, you were really just going to probe the river.
You could say that three different ways.
Now, when these first came out, this second generation, wasn't the license plate up between the taillights maybe? I don't remember that reflector in the middle.
Oh, yeah. See, I'm okay.
Like this may not be the first of the 93s, but a little bit later.
Yeah, that's a good question.
And this one's not a GT.
Yeah.
Did they even have a 16-valve engine for the regular one? This almost seems like a European version.
The audacity of them to call it a GT.
Yeah, I was thinking this might be a European one because, you got the reflector and you got the, looks like a wide license plate.
The audacity of them to have a GT model without a V8.
I think there are some people out there that have V8 swapped these.
What about a Colt G?
I'm sure it's a considerably better car. Now, if they convert it to rear-wheel drive, then they'd have a real car on their hands.
It is what it is, Jeff. Definitely not a Mustang.
I said that. There is no hate towards front-wheel drive cars. Obviously, my Saab is front-wheel drive. But most people would hate on front-wheel drive cars, but don't realize that in 99% of circumstances, a front-wheel drive car can be just as fun as a rear-wheel drive car. And most people won't drive those cars anywhere near their limits anyways to notice the actual downsides of what could happen with a front-wheel drive car of, inducing understeer. So I won't hate on just the front-wheel drive, but I'd rather have a Mustang.
Okay. So I had trouble figuring out a third one. I wanted to find something more modern, and I wasn't having success. So I went back a few years, but nothing too old. And I remember that a lot of people hate these slant backs. And so Oldsmobile had one, but I think the Buick comes off better, especially with the Century Turbo Coupe and the Sport Coupe, which you can see on the top, or let's say the right side. My mom had a 79 wagon, a Pontiac Le Mans. So I'm familiar with all the GM cars of this era. Sure, they're underpowered and everything else, but they're solid. But I think in the end, this one, especially the Turbo Coupe, is kind of like the prototype for the Grand National. And I kind of like this free. I think Free Spirit, is that what they called the bird? I can't really remember. Something Spirit. It was just like the sportier Buicks had this thing with the bird. I always thought that was kind of cool.
I believe Freebird is Leonard Skinner.
No, not Freebird. Not the bird's the word. None of that. Whatever the case.
What would you take? Firebird.
Well,
Thunderbird.
Okay, but I'm more of an A-body guy. I don't know. I mean, do you have the Oldsmobile version?
I do not.
Okay. So here's another one. I just think they're interesting. I mean, sure, that we hadn't gotten to the point where turbos were good, but Buick was trying. It's still the 3.8. But really, in the end, a lot of people don't like the slant back, and I've never had an issue with it.
I don't see the big deal. Speaking of Escorts, it kind of reminds me of the 80s Escort, the roofline.
I don't know. You mean like the 83 Escort?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I don't know the exact year, but yeah, the boxier ones.
This one's got a trunk.
So this has a trunk, even though it looks like it would be a hatchback. Oh, I see.
Oh.
Just the little section there opens up. Okay.
Interesting.
But I think it's an interesting footnote that, I know one guy who's always at the Pure Stock races in Michigan. His name is Stark. Nice guy, and he's got one, and he, I don't remember what kind of times he's turning. It's definitely not at Grand National times, but they're rare. And I mean, in the end, we're not talking about the turbo coupe necessarily, but the slant back. A lot of people think it's ugly. And these are people that grew up with the cars, older than me, let's say. I got no issues.
Yeah, this is, these are what? Magnum 500 wheels that are thrown on this one at a car show?
They're the Buick Chrome Mags.
Oh.
Similar but different. Much more different than similar.
Yeah, I mean, they're kind of fun. I mean, the rear part of the car almost makes me feel very like European Ford Escort-ish in a sense, with the kind of like little flare and the way the headlights are oriented, which is kind of fun. It still looks like it's a fairly sizable car. It looks like it's almost as big as that C6 Corvette it's next to in this photo.
I mean, back then it was a mid-size car, and this was the downsized mid-size car. I couldn't tell you. I bet an Accord today is probably larger than this, but I could be wrong.
It probably is. Modern day Accords seem like they're huge. Modern land yachts.
But this is, it's the same platform as the Grand National and all that.
Yeah, it's certainly unique.
78, 79, maybe 80s when they made it. Not sure, but 78.
Yeah, I think in this brochure we had, I think it said 79. 1979 Buick Centuries are here. So exciting. I do like the little dial wheels up here at the top. These are kind of fun.
They remind me of a late 70s Vet wheel.
Oh, okay. Sure. I was also thinking the Dukes of Hazzard Charger wheel.
So you can see this red one in the middle is kind of the base one. They call that the Century Special. And it's not that it's special. It's actually harkens back to the Buick name Special, which was usually the bottom of the line Buick.
Yeah, that one's pretty uninteresting, aside from the white interior with the red is kind of cool, but that one's pretty boring. The turbo's fun with the spoiler.
And I think you could get a stick, but not with the turbo. I know Oldsmobile. Oldsmobile is a little bit more well-known for the stick in these cars, and I think it was only available with the 260 V8. But I don't know if that engine was shared with the Buick. Of course, this is the time when they were sharing engines a lot.
If you throw some window louvers in the back, you have a Fox body. All right.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that's the interior.
It's the same thing as the Regal, and this is just the Century, different name, same car otherwise. Oh, look at this.
Yeah, so this is me. Truth be told, I think I was going to pick a Jaguar. I was going to pick like a Jaguar XK8 or something like that. And I was like, well, those are pretty attractive cars. They're also movies. So I wanted to pick something. And I grew up on American and British stuff, so I had to pick something British because, as we all know, there are lots of both electrical and mechanical problems with certain British cars. So this is a Rover SD1 Vitesse. So this is the bad boy. These are really cool in the sense that they came with a Rover V8. We got them a little bit later here in the US. It first appeared in 1980, which was not the first model year for the SD1, but it came back after a 10-year hiatus because Rover had actually left the US. So this car was one of the first years of Rover's now selling cars again in the US. But the Vitesse is the high-performance version, so you're looking at around 192 horse. From the V8, which isn't amazing, but considering the motor's heritage, the Rover V8 is actually kind of based off a BOP engine from the 1960s.
I thought it was based on a Buick engine.
Yeah, so BOP stands for Buick Oldsmobile Pontiac.
It's purely Buick.
Are you?
You could get that engine in a Pontiac, I believe, and maybe an Oldsmobile. Is the 215? So the Oldsmobile had it because the turbojet fire was the same engine. It was the Buick engine engineered by Oldsmobile. Pontiac, I think, is at the 4 and may have had this and then eventually had the 326.
Yeah, that I'm not sure of. I do know that the Rover V8 name comes because after they got the licensing of the engine from GM and Mercury Marine, that they roverized, in their terminology, they roverized the engine to change it up a little bit, and including the SD1, which originally had the earlier versions, I think had some carbureted variants, and then the 1980, the Vitesse could get the fuel-injected version, which could be available with a 5-speed manual transmission. So these are cool, mostly because they look like a Ferrari 365 GTB4 or Daytona, for some of you that may not recognize it by that name. And it even has, so obviously the headlights are the main feature, with the wraparound turn signals are very much stolen from the 365, but then it's also got the same dagger blood trough design down the side of the car, which are the little indentations that you see here. Go all the way down. So that's apparently inspired by blood troughs and daggers. Yeah, so in case you want to know, if you stab somebody, you want the blood to run out of them after you stab them. So that's why it's called the blood trough. And so design language.
I used to see these when I was a kid, and I know they're pretty rare. So when I say I used to see these, it probably wasn't many, but I do remember them.
Yeah, they're kind of like, the cool parent family car. Obviously, they've got 4 doors. The cool part about these is they were also used as race cars.
And the police cars.
Yes, they were also used as police cars as well. So they're fairly cool. No, not as police cars in the state. But they're very cool cars and they're sort of like understated. They got like a cool styling bit to them, I think for like a fairly large 4-door, they do a good job of kind of proportioning everything. And you just tell everybody it's based on a Ferrari. So,
I mean, in the end, everything about this car is good, except that the era in which it came from.
And and the fact that, it may or may not have some questionable electronics and things.
Well, that's part of the era still, but it's a great looking car from its time. Mm-hmm. It still it has aged well. It has good influences.
They sound great at idle too, even without an exhaust. With an exhaust, or without an exhaust, I should say, they sound fantastic as well. But they have a nice, like low, like blah 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 V8,
like a
noise to them.
What size was it? What, a 3.5?
Yeah, 3.5. Mm-hmm. 3.5 liter V8. But I think it's cool because it's kind of understated. You don't see them that often, if ever. I think I've seen one here in Phoenix in all of my time here.
But do people hate these cars?
Most people just don't care about them, I think.
Even in the UK?
Yeah, they're not really worth anything either. You can buy an SD1 Vitesse. I mean, in the UK, they had even less significant versions. They had, I believe, 4-cylinder and 6-cylinder versions in Europe that we didn't see here. So the V8 one, we obviously got the cooler one here as we got the car a little bit later, like I mentioned, after it had been in production for a little bit. But they're pretty cool cars. You don't see them that often. They're not really worth anything. And most people don't want to take the time to work on them or deal with any of the heartache. I know some people will even mess around or change some of the fuel injection, even though I think it is Bosch fuel injection, I believe, that's actually in these cars. So not a British engineered part.
Yeah, but I guess since it's a relatively early fuel injection system, that's probably parts replacement is probably an issue, I would imagine.
I know that parts for these cars can be hard to find in general, especially the Vitesse, but I'm not sure exactly what it looks like because I don't own one yet. So maybe I'll buy one eventually and then come ask me.
Well, you got to get the C4 first, the XK8.
Yep.
Got to get this.
Probably a Porsche Cayenne.
Yeah. The list grows, man.
Oh, yeah. There's a super long list. The order is always changing as to what gets bought when.
Does it include any Thunderbirds?
Yeah, they're just really far down on the list. But here's the V8. So they actually even had, I think, some different intakes. So you can see here, this looks like 2 throttle bodies for the fuel injection system. And I think there's a couple different options. But, I would be willing to bet if you didn't want to deal with some of the, sides of this car, I bet you could probably fit an LS in there.
I think it would be better off to develop the V8. I think it'd be more interesting.
That might be more interesting. I mean, one of the reasons Rover picked this V8 is because of the size. So compared to, one, GM wouldn't give them anything that was currently in production when Range Rover were looking for a replacement engine. But they needed something small enough to fit into some of the smaller Range Rover models. And so this was an engine that would do just that. And it fit in their smallest model at the time, which I believe was the P6 Range Rover. And so they'd be able to adapt and use this engine, which it was such a big change for Rover because the Range Rover, I think, had a 6-cylinder, and this weighed 200 pounds less than that 6-cylinder and made more power.
Aluminum.
Yeah. So pretty interesting engine. I just think this is a fun version to use it because they just stole the design from Ferrari and made it a 4-door.
There was a sports car with this engine too called the Vetta Ventura, which I think also was called Apollo. I don't know if the owners changed or what, like in the early mid 60s. Kind of looks Ferrari-esque in some ways.
There's a ton of cars with this engine, ton of sports cars.
Yeah, but this one's American. I mean, like, let's say an American car that needed some engine.
So it's not the Rover V8 though, is it? Or did they use the
Buick.
Pop?
It's the Buick.
That makes more sense. All right. That's...
Oh, look at that. What is that? Looks Italian.
Huh? No. This is the Rover. Yeah, this is the interior of the Rover.
That's it. Kind of just ruined it for me.
That's fine. This is on my list of love but shouldn't.
It's like they got some Legos and just made a dashboard.
Yeah, but I think the doors being all carpet, I think would have to be changed.
Look at that.
Yeah, that's bad.
Disinfected and then changed.
Yes. Yeah, maybe just lit on fire. Take it off the car and lit on fire. But the fact that you can get a 5-speed manual transmission with a V8 and have a reasonable car, I think is hilarious. So I would daily one of these, honestly.
Did you see how big that ashtray was on the door?
Are you sure that's not just like a door pull kind of handle thing?
Yeah, that looks like an ashtray.
Oh, that might be. It could be an ashtray. I don't know. It'd be really big for a non-Italian car.
I hope they have an ashtray in the Thunderbird for my pipe.
And a pipe holder or something in the center.
I'm sure you can get an accessory, one of those. Maybe WeatherTech makes one.
Yeah.
Right. So with that, that is the highlight, I guess, of our cars that we love but shouldn't. So now it's time to take a look at some of the cars which are currently live on AutoHunter.com, our online auction website. So let's take a look. Oh, I'm first, I guess. So this is a Jaguar XKR. So this is a pretty cool one. This is 2008. So this is changing after the XK8. It's a supercharged 4.2 liter V8 that makes around 420 horse, which is nothing to snuff at. That's quite a bit of power for something like that. And it's about 413 pound-feet of torque. So this is a fairly grunty car in terms of get up and go. It's a 6-speed auto, and then 0 to 60 in around 4.2 seconds per road and track. So I think in 2008, that would make this one of the faster non-supercar.
Yeah, I mean,
cars.
in some ways, this looks like a cheap Aston Martin. To me, I don't mean visually, but just like everything.
That's what I think most people would tell you Jaguar's kind of always been. Like, look at the XK8 compared to its Aston Martin sibling. I say sibling, just comparative.
Right.
Yeah, they've always kind of looked similar.
Swoopy coupe, curvy, muscular.
Yeah, they've always looked similar. I mean, even
Local car.
Yes, this is a local car. It's being sold out of Phoenix, Arizona. It's currently live on AutoHunter.com. This particular car is black, and obviously the R is just the famous Jaguar. This one being a supercharged V8 just makes it that much more interesting.
Now, is it intercooled? Because in the description it said that. Supercharged and intercooled.
You know, that I don't know off the top of my head. I don't know enough about these newer Jags to know the ins and outs of them. I suppose it could be, given the power improvements kind of over the previous generations of Jags. That would make sense because that would be an easier way to get more out of it and probably be needed in somewhere like Arizona. Let's see. There is too many engine covers. Obviously, the intercooler would not be visible from anywhere here. So we can tell you that it doesn't have an air-to-water intercooler. But you'd have to take a look at the front of the car. Get low, probably.
If I didn't know any better, I'd say that was the interior of your Lexus.
Oh,
this is a better version of it. To be honest, I used to hate this whole wood leather mix of stuff.
I like
I've gotten a little bit older and now I can appreciate it in certain cars. Like if it's not meant to be a like purely go fast car, like let's be honest, this is a Grand Touring car. And so what this is well, if I want the grunt, I have the grunt. and I could tell people I have a Jag.
See, if this was in like a vet, it would look all wrong. But a Jag,
Yes.
yeah, totally
Perfect
fits.
in a Jag. Yeah, I want a Jag with a beautiful wood interior.
XK8, man.
Yes.
XK8.
Oh, yeah. It's on the list. So this is a cool one that I wanted to highlight just because I feel like we've had some of them come here and there. I think we've even had some F-types come through as far as just the Jaguar two-door sports cars. And I have grown to love them lately as they take an increasingly higher order as what I may purchase next.
I think you should, man. And that you can tell this has a very Arizona-friendly interior because it's not black.
Yes, as someone who owns a black interior car in Arizona and a black exterior car, I can tell you that tan is much friendlier than black.
Yeah.
Oh, look,
All right.
another Jaguar.
Yeah, another Jag. This has a very different interior, but yeah. So this one is a XJS convertible from the 90s. This is actually a 1990. It's got the 5.3 liter V12 under the hood. That's paired with a 3-speed automatic. So that color is called Diamond Blue Metallic.
It's a good color.
Yeah, and then I like the fact that it's all color coordinated because you got a dark blue top, and then on the inside, it has an Isis blue leather interior. So something a little different. Although for the 80s, 90s, that wasn't wildly atypical because my a car that I drove in the past was a Toyota Cressida that had a blue leather interior. That was from the late 80s.
Cool.
I mean, silver and blue is a fantastic mix of colors.
Yeah, and this it isn't too bright. It's on the darker side, and then of course you've got the brighter wood trim there.
This one has the older taillights, the original ones.
Yes, I think so. Yeah,
It looks so much better that way.
Instead of the bars.
Maybe you can answer this, but I want to say that they actually introduced a convertible first with the rails.
I think so, yeah, and that was like one of those retrofits, right? But from a different company.
I think it was factory, but I just remember that as a kid. But I think then they introduced the convertible right after. Maybe there was like 1 year of that. I don't know.
This is a slick looking car. I like the mesh wheels.
I do like the wheels. Are the wheels stock?
Yeah. I mean,
that's
they're not
pretty nice.
aftermarket.
What I remember about these cars also is that they did not sell very well in the US. Maybe it was just expensive, but at some point towards the end of its life, whenever that was, they just started selling. Like maybe it was the convertible that made people more attracted to it. But this has been around since the late 70s. And I mean, I saw it like once a year I'd see one. And then all of a sudden it starts being like, maybe an alternative to a BMW convertible.
We should bring somebody in that is like a, marketing focused professional that can tell us why certain models of cars sell more in their later years as they get older than
Like the 4Runner.
earlier on. Like the 4Runner, like the R107 Mercedes.
Which one's that?
That is the 1970. Oh God, when was the first year? I want to say like 78.
Is this the SL?
Yeah.
So the SL, okay, perfect example. The SL also, I think, probably competed with this, and the SL was more popular, but at some point when the convertible was introduced, it started becoming more popular also. The SL is a good example of that too.
It'd be at a disadvantage against the SL because the SLs are all hard tops and soft tops.
I believe the end of 71 is when the SL came, so maybe 72 model year.
Yeah, that's probably better. Than that car was in production for a long time.
Yeah.
Because they delayed the R129 generation. But those are pretty cool. I actually prefer the US headlight style for those, but I want European
the
bumpers.
European ones. I mean,
I don't like the European headlights.
But the European ones for these are awesome, I think.
Interesting little
the bumpers would need to be replaced.
interesting little bit of trivia about this general body style of the XJS. Do you remember a popular movie around the mid 90s that had one of these in it?
Didn't The Saint have this?
That I don't know. Now, this is kind of a trick question because this was not a lead character's vehicle. This made a cameo in a popular action movie in the 90s. And I think it was a newer model.
Eat, Drink, Man, Woman? Oh, sorry.
No, there was... Okay, so in the movie Speed, you remember when he's trying to get on the bus he like takes over, he commandeers that guy's vehicle. And the guy's got like dreadlocks, and he takes over his vehicle. And it was, I think, a later model with the newer taillights, but it was an XJS convertible. And then the guy, he gets, Keanu Reeves gets on the bus, and then the guy has to take control of the car, and he slams into these trash cans on the freeway that are filled with water. It was one of these.
I have never actually seen anybody hit one of those aside from in movies.
Oh, yeah.
The water things.
Yeah, here in Arizona, they just hit each other. Cars just hit each other all the time.
People in bumper cars here. Do you know if that center console is supposed to be like a cup holder thing? It seems like a really odd shape otherwise.
Yeah, I can't imagine what else it would be designed for.
Like you put a phaser in there.
That's where your cell phone, your phone, in-car phone goes. Yeah, your in-car phone goes there.
The one they can carry on your shoulder.
Yeah, there's the V12. Seeing the AC compressor just sit in the middle of the engine like that's a little weird.
Well, one thing I will say is you can see all the mechanical bits, whereas if this car was new now, it'd just be covered by plastic.
Like my Jaguar was all covered and this is all open, which I appreciate being open, even though there's quite a bit of miscellaneous hoses all over the top of this engine. But they give you easy access to the relays, it looks like, which you may need. This is a British car after all.
This kind of reminds me of, a lot of watches, they have just like a solid metal case back. This is like an exhibition case back where you can see the rotor turning and all the guts of the movement of the watch.
Yeah, put a clear hood on it and drive it like that.
Yeah, I like that. Or at least, or even just a big cutout, I'm surprised that hasn't taken off, to be honest with you.
It kind of has for like the JDM scene. There's people that do that.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so here we have a 56 Ford. I do like 56 Fords, even though I'm not a Ford guy. 56 is much better than 55 to me. This one is interesting because it's a mainline, which is the bottom of the line, but there's a special model within the mainline, which was called the business sedan. So what that means...
Does it come with a little bit of extra footroom?
Well, actually, in some ways, yes. There's no rear seats. It was built for, let's say, traveling salesmen and women, if that existed back then.
The business class.
Or let's say maybe you were someone of the trades and had a lot of equipment. You would just open the door and put it in the back. So this is kind of the lightest, most bottom-of-the-line Ford available. In 1956. It's just kind of a throwback to an earlier era where they had business coupes. And these pretty much died off around then. I can't tell you when the last year was, maybe 59. You can even see backup lights are optional.
So for these, similar how modern performance cars charge you more to take stuff out of the car, was it the same way then?
No. This was definitely the cheapest. Don't quote me on this, but I think the side trim is from a custom line. I don't think that the main line had any trim, but maybe it was an option as well. But still, no back seat.
Yeah, this one looks like it's been modified a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Yeah, maybe to go fast in straight lines. 3-speed, sit on the floor. Oh wow, all the gauges have been replaced.
Oh yeah, and you got looks like a B&M shifter. On the floor.
All these modifications are for someone else in the end. I just thought that there's something interesting about this model and it was worth talking about.
Sure, and this one is now taking advantage of the lessened weight and adding power. Yeah, add lightness, then horsepower.
Exactly.
It's a Lotus,
and it's ready to get down to business.
All right.
I had to say that. It's in my contract.
All right. So with that, all of those cars that we just looked at are actually currently live on AutoHunter.com, which is our online auction and has cars going live every single weekday. And of course, makes this podcast video cast possible. Of course, AutoHunter is driven by ClassicCars.com, which is our online marketplace, which has over 30,000 cars currently live on the site. So if you're interested in buying or selling your collector car, be sure to check out AutoHunter.com or ClassicCars.com. And with that, that's going to be the end of the video. So thank you so much for watching. If you go ahead and hit that like button for us, we'd really appreciate it. And can consider getting subscribed for more content like that in the future. Thank you so much for watching.